Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own Small or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by Gesshoo, and you can find the link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Dani.
Small, Chapter 7. Are you ready?
Ready.
Are you certain?
Oh, I said I'm ready.
Tally groaned and repositioned herself on the ground, her hands in the dirt and her tiny butt jutted up into the air.
I want to go now, Sarah.
Sarah chuckled beside her. All right, my love. Let's see if you can keep up. Then, with no warning, she simply took off in a mad dash, laughing as Tally's small but sharply indignant grunts sounded behind her.
No fair!
She shouted, but the words were punctuated by a wild giggle as she lunged into action. Her long little legs put in the work, but they were no match for Sarah's as they raced toward one of the training ground's most difficult obstacle courses. It was shortly after dawn, and the grounds were empty, the sun still pale bright and rising. The air was crisp in Sarah's lungs as she reached the first of the obstacles, and she could hear the biddies cheering from a distance, encouraging Tally to
Go, go, go!
And Tally most certainly did. She reached the base of the first climbing wall just as Sarah crested the top. Sarah paused, straddling the top of the wall, and stared down at her with a proud smile as Tally grabbed the thin rope hanging over wood and launched herself up like a spider. Tally reached the top in seconds, barely winded at all, and beamed brightly at Sarah, dimples on full display. Excellent form, Sarah said, and those dimples somehow sank deeper. Ready?
Ready!
Sarah tossed her leg over and leapt from the wall. It was a sharp drop, and she felt the familiar ping of it in her knees as she landed. She wasted no time whirling back around, and Tally barely let her get her hands up, for she was leaping after her with fearless abandon. Sarah caught her with an oomph and set her down.
Let's go!
Tally screamed the moment her feet hit the ground, and then she was off again. She was on her belly in the mud in seconds, elbowing and kneeing her way across a massive expanse of deliberately flooded trenches with barbed wire overhead.
She's kicking your ass, Sarah!
Ophelia's voice sang through as Sarah dropped onto her stomach and quickly made to catch up. She ended up with a face splattered with mud when she managed to get a little too close to Tally's kicking feet just as they reached the end of the trenches, but it hardly fazed her. Sarah Alder was nothing if not thoroughly accustomed to getting dirty. She was also nothing if not shamelessly addicted to the happy little squeal that pierced the air the moment Tally freed herself from the trenches and raced for the next obstacle.
My Sarah's so slow!
She shouted, and Sarah laughed out loud, unabashed and breathless with it. She hadn't felt so ridiculously, wildly joyful since before the Tarum, the last kiss she and Tally had shared as fully themselves, hidden away in a small alcove on the bat where Tally had told Sarah she looked unfairly sexy in combat gear, and Sarah, smug as she'd ever been, had kissed her utterly senseless. Tally reached the large expanse of tires laid along the ground and skidded to a stop. Not quite large or long enough to sprint cleanly through. It was no matter, however, as Sarah reached her in a flash, scooped her up into her arms, and raced through with ease. Knees high, balls on her feet bouncy. On the other side, she dropped Tally back to her feet, already running, and they both shot for the next climbing wall. A crack of thunder rang overhead, and Tally squealed. Sarah glanced quickly back at the biddies on the sidelines and saw their mouths open, singing. A second later, the rain came, pouring down in a halo of chilled drops that kept to the space just over Sarah and Tally's heads, and Sarah's joy somehow magnified. She was freezing cold in seconds, but Tally was laughing and clapping while she ran, and there wasn't an ounce of fear or hesitation in her small girl. Only focus and drive and an infectious, childish glee.
Sarah, get down!
Tally shouted, but Sarah was already ahead of her, spinning on her heels at the wall and dropping into a strong squat with her hands laced in front of her, palms up. Tally jumped with all her might, slamming one foot down into Sarah's hands and let herself be tossed. Sarah threw her upward, then quickly turned to watch her girl soar. Tally flew like a bird up to the much higher rope dangling along the slanted wall and latched on. Her feet slipped when they smacked into the wall, but she quickly found her balance and started her scale. Sarah backed away from the wall, then barreled toward it again, building enough momentum to launch herself up. With no partner or team to aid her, she boosted herself with a quick elevating seed, just enough to latch onto the rope, and then she was right on Tally's heels again. The far side of the wall was made up of metal bars, now soaking wet and slippery, but Tally didn't seem to struggle with them in the slightest. She raced down, one bar after another with Sarah right behind her, and the moment her feet touched the ground again, she was off again for the next obstacle. Her red hair was a rich clay brown from the rain and plastered to her head where it had fallen from the alder braids Savannah had given her shortly after waking, but she never slowed. She simply pushed it out of her face and kept on, unbothered.
Monkey bars!
She shouted over the thunder, her feet splashing with every rapid step. The monkey bars over the pit were too thick for Tally's small hands, so Sarah squatted without a word, and Tally leapt onto her back. Sarah jumped and caught the first bar, then swung to the next. She did her best to keep her grip while dangling from the wet bars with the extra weight on her back, the metal pinging with each slap of the palm to the next, and Tally cheered her on the entire time, her small voice right at Sarah's ear, her little hands clutching the material of Sarah's shirt right around Sarah's neck.
You can do it, Sarah! Go! Go!
Sarah jumped from the last bar, her boots landing in the mud with a loud splat, and Tally squealed with pride and joy. She wriggled quickly off Sarah's back and took off again as if energy was something infinite and enduring. She was a tiny demon on the obstacle course, unstoppable. Even when she slipped and fell in the mud, she was hindered only a second before she was back on her feet, ready for whatever lay ahead. When they reached the strike wall, Sarah quickly stopped and held up a hand for Tally to do so, too. Tally skidded in the mud, but managed to stay on her feet. She looked up at Sarah with an eager, soaked face. "Wind strike?" she asked, and Sarah nodded, but didn't give her the go-ahead. "I will strike the wall," she said, "and then I want you to wait for my order to run through. Understood?"
But I can strike,
Tally protested.
I can do it. I promise.
"I know you can, my love," Sarah said, and dropped to her knees in the mud. She grasped Tally's shoulder with one hand and cupped the other around one chilled, wet cheek. "I just want to be careful. Your work is unpredictable right now, and it is best to be cautious." Tally planted her feet firmly and propped her hands on her hips. Her bottom lip jutted forward in a pleading pout. "I want to try," she said, and her voice was so pitiful and earnest that Sarah felt an almost painful twinge in her chest. Goddess! That wasn't fair.
Please, my Sarah.
Sarah sighed and, against her better judgment, relented. "Very well, then," she said, and sent a quick request to the biddies to cease the rain. It petered out in seconds, and the sky cleared. At Tally's side, Sarah knelt and rested a hand on her back, right between her small shoulder blades. A focused wind strike will be difficult for one so small, So I want you to stop and tell me immediately if you feel ill or overexerted. And don't be upset if you cannot strike through. It may take more force than you're capable of right now, but that doesn't mean you aren't a strong and talented witch. Do you understand? Tally was shivering but clearly excited, bouncing on the balls of her feet as if there were springs under her little boots. Yes, ma'am, she said with a serious nod, and Sarah couldn't help but smile. Good girl. She stroked down Tally's soaked shirt, then settled her palm at the base of her spine, steadying her. When you are ready, then, you may begin. With another serious nod and a focused gaze so intense it would make any adult uncomfortable to see on a 5-year-old's face, Tally dropped into a firm squat and opened her small hands at her sides. She took a big, deep breath and let it calmly go, and Sarah felt an odd spark of pride in her chest. A second later, Tally dropped her little mouth open and positively roared. It was the highest-pitched wind strike Sarah had ever heard, and it was effective. Startlingly so. Sarah's eyes blew wide as the strike wall buckled with a sharp crack right in its center. A half-second later, it was gone. Holy Mother of the Goddess, Lisha said, her shocked voice spilling through Sarah's mind. Sarah wanted to agree, but for the moment, all she could do was gape at the entire middle portion of the strike wall, or what used to be its middle portion. Now it was nothing but open air, ash-like debris falling from its remaining edges. She had only a moment to appreciate the damage done, however, for Tally's delighted squeal rent the air, startling her from her stupor.
I did it, Sarah!
She shouted as she clapped her hands, celebrating herself. That's the understatement of the year, Yarrow said, and Sarah felt the other biddies' lightning-quick agreement. She's definitely channeling your power, Sarah, Savannah added. Perhaps all of ours to some extent. It must be the melding of the bonds, Ember said. A strike of that level could not be possible at 5 years old. Sarah knew this. Of course, she knew, but she couldn't quite make her mouth function. Her voice was stalled in her throat. That is, until Tally's triumphant cheering suddenly choked down to a rough whisper of sound, then utter silence. Sarah's head turned sharply, instantly alert. Tally? The small girl turned towards her, a little wobbly on her feet, and a deep frown settled over her childish features.
Sarah?
Sarah had her in a flash, one hand steady on Tally's shoulder, and the other curling around one puffy, rain-wet cheek again. What is it, my love? Do you feel ill? She felt Tally's skin for signs of fever, but it was impossible to tell with the chill of the rain. So she dropped her fingers to Tally's neck and pressed for her pulse. It was fast, popping against her fingertips, not alarmingly so. Tally, talk to me, darling. Do you feel sick? One wee hand went to Tally's stomach and rubbed as the girl closed her eyes for a moment. Her frown deepened as her lips parted. A second later, she curled at the waist and emptied herself on the ground. Vomit splashed into the mud and over Sarah's boots, and Sarah grimaced but couldn't say she was surprised. The amount of energy required for the wind strike Tally had only just performed was likely more than could be held in such a small body. She was just happy Tally had remained conscious. A little vomit she could handle. Another experience like the one she had in the necropolis, watching Tally's eyes roll back in her head? Well, Sarah wasn't sure she had it in her to go through that again. You are okay, Sarah cooed, and shifted around Tally to gather up her errant strands of hair. She peeled them away from Tally's face as the girl gagged on bile and retched onto the ground again. This will pass. I have you. Tally whined as she heaved again, and Sarah pulled her shirt up to slip a hand under. She lay her palm flat against the cool skin of Tally's back and rubbed slow circles there. You did so well, my love, she said as Tally wiggled herself backward until her entire back was pressed to Sarah's chest, seeking the comfort of her body. Sarah pulled her hand free from Tally's shirt so she could wrap both arms around her small girl instead, and held her through the last waves of retching. I am so proud of you. When the last of it passed, Tally sagged in Sarah's arms and released a tired sigh. My mouth tastes bad, she said, and Sarah chuckled. I would imagine it does. Tally turned in Sarah's arms and snuggled into her neck. I'm sorry, my Sarah. Whatever for? Soldiers don't get sick. Well, that certainly isn't true, Sarah told her and held her close, slipping her hand under Tally's shirt again to rub her back. Soldiers get sick all the time. They do? Of course, Sarah reassured. We may be strong, but we are only human, my love, and our bodies have limits and weaknesses. You performed an impressive, powerful working, and it was hard on your body. That is nothing to be ashamed of or sorry for. Do you understand? Tally nodded against Sarah's neck and tried to wiggle herself closer. She was as close as she could get, but Sarah still squeezed her tighter to let her know she understood the need. I pooped on you, Sarah, she mumbled, and Sarah felt a laugh bubble in her throat. She set it free a second later and felt Tally's answering giggle vibrate against her throat. Yes, you did. Still love Tally? Sarah sighed and turned her nose into the wet hair behind Tally's ear, whispered, Oh, Tally. She kissed the girl's tiny witch mark and gently swayed with her in her arms, rocking side to side. I love you so very much more than words can say. Tally sighed dramatically in her arms, drawing another easy laugh from Sarah. Then she pulled back and cupped her little hands around Sarah's muddy cheeks. My Sarah needs a bath. Yes, she does, Sarah agreed, then bopped the tip of Tally's nose with her finger. And so does my Tally. Tally nodded and stretched her mouth into a bitter yawn that made Sarah's nose wrinkle. And a thorough mouthwash and toothbrushing, Sarah said, and Tally giggled. Then breakfast. Breakfast? Sarah looked up as the biddies joined them, circling around. It was Yarrow who had spoken, staring at Tally like she'd grown an extra head. You already had breakfast, Tally. Well, to be fair, Ember said, she did just burn a ton of calories on the obstacle course. Plus, her breakfast is currently in a puddle on the ground. She pointed to the vomit still visible in the mud. Literally, right at your feet, Yar. Watch your boots. Then Ember bent and held her hand up in the air. You did awesome, Tally. Give me 5. Tally grinned so wide that it looked borderline painful and smacked Ember's hand in a loud 5. Did you see my wind strike, Ember? Did I see it? Ember chuckled. Are you kidding? We all saw it. It was amazing. Tally's neck and cheeks went splotchy with reds and pinks as she bounced on her heels again, then slammed her blushing face into Sarah's neck. Sarah grunted with the pressure, but took it in stride. You kicked Sarah's butt too, Tal, Lisha said, and Tally's face quickly shot up again, this time wearing an angry pout. Nuh-uh, she said with a firm shake of her head. Me and Sarah are a team. My Sarah keeps me safe. Sarah sent Lisha a smug smirk, and the biddy rolled her eyes. Oh, right, Lisha said. Of course. Didn't you see us on the monkey bars? We were so fast. So fast, Lisha agreed, and the other biddies nodded. See? Tally curled one hand around the back of Sarah's neck and rubbed her little thumb back and forth. She lay her forehead against Sarah's temple as she wiggled to sit on Sarah's prop knee, the other still kneeling in the dirt. The best team. The very best, Sarah agreed. Now, I know you are tired, my love, but I will ask anyway, since I know how strong you are. Do you want to finish the course before we head in? Yeah! Tally cheered and perked up, but then she frowned a moment later and shook her head. But I think I need a second breakfast, my Sarah. Probably right now. It feels like an emergency. That was certainly more in line with what Sarah had been expecting, and she and the biddies all chuckled as she nodded and scooped Tally up into her arms. She propped her up on her hip, long legs dangling, and said, "Well then, we mustn't wait." And together, the odd, lovely collective headed back for the administration building as Tally sing-songed through the air,
Second breakfast for Tally.
Tally scrubbed her teeth with a toothbrush as she stood stark naked on a stool in front of the bathroom mirror. White foam dripped down from her chin and plopped into the porcelain as she danced and wiggled from side to side with each back and forth of the brush. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she watched her, because as childish and adorable as it was exactly how her Tally, adult Tally, brushed her teeth as well. Sarah chuckled. "Keep the foam inside the sink, please." She started up the shower and stuck her hand inside to check the temperature. "Are you nearly finished?"
Whoop.
The single word was muffled by toothpaste, but then Tally was spitting and rinsing and dropping her brush back into the small cup on the sink right next to Sarah's. She leapt wildly off the stool and joined Sarah at the shower.
How come no bubble bath, Sarah?
"Because we are muddy, my love," Sarah told her. "We don't want to sit in a bath full of muddy water, do we?" Tally tilted her head as if thinking she might not be entirely opposed to a mud bath. Then she gave a firm, serious nod and slapped Sarah right on the ass. Sarah yelped. "What was that for?"
Pants off, Sarah!
She cheered and yanked open the shower door to hop inside. Amused, Sarah shook her head and laughed. She stripped her dirty clothes quickly and stepped into the shower with Tally. She piled it into a sudsy red and white mountain on top of her head and did a little dance while Sarah stood in the spray and wetted her own hair through. "You are certainly in a good mood today," she said as she shifted Tally back under the water to rinse. "What has you so happy?" "My Sarah," Tally said simply as she pumped some conditioner into her hand and plopped it on top of her head. "Oh, I see," Sarah said with a smile. "And what have I done to make you happy?" Tally grinned up at her, dimples on full display as she messily scrubbed conditioner into her hair.
You love me.
Sarah snorted and shook her head. "That is true every day," she said, and Tally giggled.
And every day I'm so happy.
With a sigh and an ache in her chest that Sarah didn't let herself linger on too long, she bent to help Tally properly condition, working through her tangles with her fingers until Tally's red hair ran smooth and dark down her back. "There we go," she said. "Now rinse."
Is it out?
Tally asked after a thorough rinsing and turned to let Sarah inspect her hair for signs of suds. When she found none, she handed Tally a bar of soap and let her scrub herself down as Sarah quickly washed her own hair and rinsed. A minute later, covered in a soapy sheen and grinning like a soaked little demon, Tally pressed the bar of soap to Sarah's belly and began to scrub.
Let Tally wash you.
"Thank you, my love," she said, "but it would be faster if I do it myself." She gently took the soap from Tally's small hands as the girl looked up at her with a pitiful, soul-destroying pout.
But
Her bottom lip trembled in an obviously forced manner that still somehow made Sarah want to give Tally anything she could ever want in the exact moment she wanted it.
I always wash my Sarah.
It was true. They often shared their showers and baths, whether for comfort, convenience, or pleasure, or regardless of the reason. Tally almost always washed Sarah. There was something so lovely and intimate about the gesture, whether sex followed or not. Tally simply loved taking care of Sarah, and Sarah loved letting her. But now it was different. Their intimacy felt altogether odd, not unpleasant, just strange, foreign, something precious and comfortable, but altered and incomplete. And goddess, this ache, this grief she had for the loss of it, of what it used to be and may never be again. Sarah couldn't shake it. Her eyes began to sting with tears, and she had to swallow back the urge to let them fall, let them disappear unnoticed by the sweet little girl sharing her shower rain. Instead, she sighed and let herself drop gently down to her knees. "Okay," she whispered, and let Tally do her work, meticulously soaping her up as she hummed a nonsense song and dropped the soap every few minutes. She giggled every time she did it, and each little laugh loosened the tight grip of grief around Sarah's heart. She felt lighter by the time it was done and rinsed quickly. Tally was a tiny prune when they stepped out of the shower, but she didn't seem to mind. In fact, she didn't even wait for a towel before taking off out of the bathroom, her wet feet leaving footprints all across the floor. "Tally!" Sarah called after her, exasperated. "You're soaking wet!" "I'm so clean!" she screamed back, and then her wild giggle grew more and more distant, and Sarah felt a twinge of panic. Of course the girl had no shame like this. She would be out of their bedroom and nakedly haunting the biddies in seconds if Sarah didn't stop her. Or worse, out of the rooms entirely and flaunting her bare butt around base. Sarah quickly dried herself off and followed. She nearly toppled over as she yanked on a pair of adult Tally sweatpants and a t-shirt that could have been either of theirs. Her hair soaked through the material in seconds, but she just needed something to cover her up while she hunted for her little gremlin of a soulmate. "Tally!" she called as she popped her head into her office, the closest to her, only to hear a wild laugh that drew her attention in the opposite direction. She sighed and headed for the biddies' dorm. Just as she'd expected, Tally was nothing if not positively enamored with her biddies. She always had been. Thankfully, they adored her just as much. When Sarah entered the dorm, she found her naked girl sitting cross-legged on Savannah's bed, half on the mattress, half on Savvy's lap, and wearing a blanket like a cape. The biddies all looked up as she entered, and Savannah snorted at Sarah's disapproving stare and sopping wet hair. "It's fine, Sarah," she said. "She isn't hurting anyone." "Though she could definitely be less proud of that tiny vagina of hers," Yarrow said from her own bed. "I've seen that girl naked more than I've seen myself naked now, and that's saying something." "It really is," Lisha added. "Yarrow always strips the second we enter the dorm." "Every day," Ember agreed. Then Ophelia joined in. "Every damned day." Yarrow nodded, unashamed. "And every last one of you loves it." Sarah snorted and crossed to Savannah's bed. "Tally, you really must stop running off like that, especially when you aren't dressed. It isn't appropriate." "But the biddies missed me so much," Tally said, looking up at Sarah with dangerously wide eyes, the kind that could charm even the most formidable opponents. All of the biddies chuckled, not one of them arguing, and Sarah sighed. "I'm sure the biddies can wait until you have pants on to see you again." Tally tilted her head and pursed her little lips as if she didn't quite believe that to be true. Then she shrugged and hopped up onto her feet again. She bounced on Savannah's bed once, twice. Then she leapt. Her naked butt flew right into Sarah's arms, blanket cape flying off of her, and her long legs wrapping tightly around Sarah's waist. "I'm ready!" "Good girl." Sarah rolled her eyes at her laughing biddies, then carried her girl back into their bedroom to dress. The smile on Anacostia tired but alert face was a balm for Sarah's soul. Her daughter sat up on her hospital bed the moment Sarah entered with Tally on her hip and the biddies trailing behind. Her lips spread with that precious, perfect smile, the one that had hardly changed since she was a girl, though it frequented her face less and less as the years dragged on. She had her hard-ass image to maintain as drill sergeant after all, but now it was bright and unabashed, and she held her arms open wide as she said, "There's my girl." "Asta!" Tally squealed, and nearly splattered herself across the floor like a squished bug as she tried to jump out of Sarah's arms and was only just caught before she could fall. Sarah huffed and set her down. "Tally, please stop doing that. You are going to send me to an early grave." "Wouldn't it technically be a late grave?" Yarrow questioned along the link, and Sarah scowled at her like a really, really, really late grave. Rude, Lissa said, but laughed all the same, and Sarah, as usual, sent a wealth of loathing through the steady stream of her love for them. It only made them laugh harder inside her head. Tally climbed up onto Anakostja's bed with a grunt and quickly tucked herself into her arms.
Costa, you napped so long. I've had many breakfasts and lunches and dinners.
Anakostja laughed through a confused frown as she stroked down Tally's still damp hair and looked up at Sarah. Wicks said I've only been out 2 days. Sarah nodded. She eats like a horse, she said. I'm convinced she has a hollow leg. She settled herself onto the edge of Anakostja's bed. It is a true comfort to see you well, Anakostja. She slipped a hand around the back of Anakostja's neck and leaned forward, pressing their foreheads together. She dropped her voice to a gentle whisper and sighed. Thank you for your sacrifice, daughter. It cannot be repaid, but I would have you know my gratitude. She forced her next words through her lips, though they weren't ones she often spoke. Sarah kept her emotions most commonly to herself, though she's certainly been more expressive since her bonding with Tally. Still, she too had an image to maintain. But for Anakostja, for this moment, and my love. Anakostja took Sarah's hand and squeezed it. I know, Mother, she said, and lowered her voice as well. I love you too.
And me!
Tally sang, jarring them both from their tender moment, and the two women laughed in unison. And you, of course, Anakostja agreed, as Sarah moved to the chair beside the bed. She stroked Tally's hair again and hugged her close. How are you feeling, sweet girl?
So clean,
Tally told her. So clean? Anakostja frowned. Is that why your hair was wet? Were you dirty?
So dirty!
Tally cheered, and Anakostja glanced to Sarah. Obstacle course. Oh, I see, Anakostja chuckled. And did you fare better this time around than your first? If I recall, you couldn't stop whining about having mud in your butt. She definitely still got mud in her butt, Sarah said, and Anakostja's laugh bloomed into something rich and deep. It dispelled the last bit of grief still clinging in her chest, and Sarah relaxed back into her chair. She heaved free a sigh full of things she knew she couldn't currently change and summoned a smile. But yes, she performed beautifully.
Me and my Sarah were so fast,
Tally told Anakostja.
You couldn't even see us.
Wow, that is fast.
I know.
The sound of the doors opening drew everyone's attention, and Sarah turned to find Abigail in the open frame. Abigail? She said, surprised. At the same time, Tally all but screamed, Aggie! Anakostja winced and covered the ear closest to Tally's bellowing, but Tally simply kept on.
Come to Tally!
Excuse me? Did I tell you about my name, young lady? Tally had the decency to look the slightest bit ashamed, but it lasted only a second before she rolled her eyes dramatically and mumbled,
Abigail.
Abigail nodded and said, Thank you.
Now come to Tally?
Not right now, Abigail told her and held up a hand before Tally could protest. But I will visit you later today. Ray and I both will.
Promise?
I promise.
Fine,
Tally groaned, and Anakostja chuckled beside her. You good, Bellwether? She asked. Or did you just come here to check on me? I'm really glad to see you awake, Abigail said. But I actually came for the general. That surprised Sarah. She raised a brow. Is that so? Yes, ma'am. I am off duty, Abigail. You can drop the formalities. Right, Abigail said with a chuckle. It's going to take a while to get used to that. For me as well, Sarah told her with a soft smile. I went to your office first, but your secretary sent me here, Abigail said. Then she turned and made a motion for someone still lingering out of sight. A moment later, the Tarum boy, Adil, stepped quietly into the frame beside her. He wore the same linen clothes he seemed to never run out of, and an olive green scarf. "This is Adil," Sarah said with a nod. "Yes, I remember. Good morning." Adil gave a gentle nod, but said nothing, and Abigail quickly cleared her throat. Um, so I've been talking with Adil. And Akash just snorted at the word choice, and Sarah couldn't help but smile. She kept it tame, something few would even notice if they didn't know her well. But yes, she could agree with Anakashta's nonverbal assessment. If she knew Abigail Bellwether, or any Bellwether for that matter, and she certainly did, talking was likely not at all what the girl had been doing with their handsome young visitor. Abigail rolled her eyes at the interruption, but pushed through. He talked to his sister, and he thinks she can help. Once again, Sarah felt a spark of hope. She'd gotten so accustomed to that spark throughout the course of her life, to feeling it ignite only to be snuffed shortly after. She braced herself for the snuffing. Always, always. Still, she tried to hold on to that spark as she looked to the young man. "Is this true?" Again, he gave a gentle nod. Then, "Your scientist, Isadora, has explained the situation, and my sister believes she may have the information you seek. She has agreed to come." The spark in Sarah's chest roared into a flame, small, but hot and alive. "That is, I am truly grateful. Thank you." Adil offered little more than an awkward, forced smile as he said, "She will arrive in 2 days' time." Sarah nodded and again said, "Thank you," as Abigail quickly shooed him back out of the infirmary, then followed with little more than a wave behind her.
Bye, Aggie.
"Well, that's good news, isn't it?" Anakashta asked once the door closed behind them, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to say anything. She suddenly felt tongue-tied and nervous, and that little flame of hope in her chest left her feeling both lighter and terrified at once. Terrified it would be snuffed as readily as all those that had come before. "Sarah." Sarah blinked and looked up. She cleared her throat. "Yes," she said, little more than a whisper. "Yes. Let us hope it is." "And let's hope it means Tally is back to herself soon," Ophelia said along the link. "As cute as she is like this, I miss her the way she was." "Same," Yarrow agreed. "I need this pressure off my knees, y'all. Plus, this whole sitch got Sarah so wound up, she could definitely use a good lay." Sarah nearly fell out of her chair as the biddies each hissed at Yarrow inside her head, and Alice, to everyone's surprise, actually chastised her. "Yarrow, Tally can hear us. Stop talking about sex."
Sex.
Tally sing-songed aloud a second later, and Sarah promptly wished the floor would open wide and swallow her whole. Anakashta frowned. "Sex? Did you just say sex?" She laughed and looked at Sarah. "Where in the world did that come from?"
Me and my Sarah do sex all the time.
Tally said, and everyone in the room balked. Yarrow wheezed so hard she choked. The other biddies were torn, collectively, between laughing and groaning. Anakashta sat with her mouth open in an embarrassingly wide and amused, "Oh." And Sarah, well, Sarah was more certain than she had ever been that she had actually died all those years ago and had clearly landed herself in hell. She groaned and pressed her rapidly heating face into her hands. "Tally, please do not say such things."
But it's true.
"It is not true," Sarah said adamantly. "Not right now, it isn't. And I would greatly appreciate it if you could not say otherwise while you are in the body of a 5-year-old. Her cheeks and chest were so hot now that she knew it had to be hellfire, and Anakashta's belly laugh, growing louder and more raucous by the second, did not help at all. Nor did the biddies' wheezing and cackling. Her tiny soulmate was utterly unbothered, though. She simply shrugged one shoulder and said, "Okay, my Sarah." "Oh, Tally," Anakashta said as she wiped amused tears from her eyes. I am enjoying 5-year-old you immensely. Tally grinned up at her, fully dimpled and utterly mischievous.
I know,
She said, and Anacostia buckled into laughter all over again. She turned and smiled at Sarah. You good, mother? She asked, tone teasing. Yes, I have descended into the 7th circle of hell, Sarah said with an annoyed roll of her eyes. Thank you for asking. She stood and made her way to an adjacent door. I am going to go lick your wounds of humiliation, Lisha provided, and as tempted as Sarah was to turn and windstrike the old bat out of the infirmary entirely, she merely sighed and nodded. Yes, she grumbled, and I will likely require a fixer, for I've had war wounds that bothered less. Do you want any company? Savi asked with a soft chuckle. Sarah's only answer was to flip her off as she disappeared through the door.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own, and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.